Okay, we are live. Okay, today is the first and most exciting parak of Rambam. It's the mitzvah of knowing that there is a God.
Tomorrow is you doing?
Yes. So now, God's existence is something which is obvious. If somebody decides he doesn't want to believe in God, he obviously is denying a fact. Just like some people have a hard time relating to somebody's death, they say, "Oh, he's not. It's impossible." Right? Some people like denying reality, so some people like denying God. But God, this that God exists is common sense. So the most mathematical proof that there's a God is that everything has a cause. Right? There's nothing that doesn't have a cause. Your mother is your cause, right? The food they eat is your cause. Everything has a cause and effect. So the cause of all causes, the first father of all fathers, the first thing, right? Before you could say evolution, okay, the first rock, right? Whatever it is. So before the person that made that rock, right? The first thing, who made that? Who made that? So then the kids always ask, who made God, right? So who made the first thing? The answer is very simple. The first thing is not in our roles. It doesn't have the role of cause and effect because it's a different type of thing. And that's God. So God is the first thing, the first cause, which is totally different than all the other effects, everything that comes out of it. So the first halacha, the first thing that Rambam writes is Yisoida, which means the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all knowledge, is to know that there is, the Hebrew word is Matsudishin, which means a first thing, a first entity, a first being, right? The first means like they were saying the first cause, the beginning. There's the beginning, which is the first thing, which is this thing, so everything that comes after it, of course, comes from it, right? Because it's the first cause. So anything that comes after it is an effect of the first cause. Everything, every single creature, every single thing, the reason why it exists the way it exists is because it's just common sense. It all comes from God, the first cause, the first thing that is. Now, the difference of the way the first cause, the first thing exists, and us, the most basic difference is that his existence is definite. It has to be. It's not happens to be. We happen to be here. We're not there. We're born now. We're not going to be. God forbid. I mean, we weren't here a couple years ago, right? So we happen to be. The table happens to be. You crack the table. There's no more table. God is, on the other hand, different than everything else. He has to be. He's definite, and that's why, if you think that God doesn't exist, then we don't exist. Because he's the first thing. So once you say that we exist, you must say God exists, right? Now, on the other hand, if we don't exist, God still exists. And the reason is very simple, because we need him, he doesn't need us. Because he's the first thing, the first cause, he doesn't need anything else. The effect doesn't matter to him. Now, this is what the pasuk says when this is what the pasuk means when he says that God is the only real thing. Of course, you're also real. You exist. You're not imagination. But compared to the existence of God, you don't exist. Because his existence is definite, and you just happen to be by his own will. He decided he was going to create you, so you come to be. On the other hand, God, nobody didn't need to decide to create him. His existence just is there. And this is what it means when it says in Torah, Ein Em Mavadeh. There's nothing else besides God. Because our existence, compared to God's existence, is not existent. God's existence is definite, and our existence is just happens to be that we are here. Now, that's step one. The first step of believing is that there is a first cause, and everything else comes from it. Now, but not only it comes from step two of the foundation of belief, is that everything is run by him. Because if you look at the way the universe works, right? And more than everything works by movement. Nothing is. Nothing just stands. Everything is constantly moving. Your body, all the cells, everything is moving. Nothing stops. Now, what we see with our eyes, the biggest movement that we see is the sun, the moon. Is what we connect to. And Abraham, the first believer, he grew up with everyone's serving idols. What was Abraham? Abraham was the first believer. It says when he was a child, he was looking, he saw the sun. He saw how mighty the sun is. Like, this must be God. This must be the controller running the show. But then at night, he sees the moon. Okay, the moon. But then he sees again the sun. He's like, you know what? There has to be something which is way above everything, which you can't touch, can't feel, can't smell, and he's running the show. And that's God. Now, the Rambam goes a little bit into detail. You know how fast things are moving? Right? Stuff moves in space. It's impossible physically for something to move that fast. Now, besides the fact, it explains in Chassidus and the Rambam explains that stuff are that every single 24 hours. We take it for granted that every morning is morning, every night is night. There's no reason why morning is morning. There's no reason why the sun is moving exactly the same speed, and every other thing in space is moving in the same speed than it did in the first day of creation. How could something that's physical move so fast and never exactly the same pace? And every single 24 hours, we end up in the same spot. And also, every single day, the direction everything moves, right? Everything moves, right? It moves every day, different direction. Every single morning, it ends up still being morning, and every night it's night, right? Every 24 hours. It makes no sense how this happens. There has to be somebody which is above everything and controlling the show. There's no other way of it working out, right? Now, in the most simple sense, look at every single thing. The ants, the way ants work, the way the tree works, everything is amazing, right? But here you have something which is most visible to us. Just the fact that how the speed of the sun must mean that there's something which is above and higher that forces everything to work the way it works. So, number one, that there is a first cause, Hashem. He's the cause of everything, and he's not dependent on anything. He exists, and he always will. He exists higher than time and space. Step two, everything that happens in this world is caused by him because there's no other explanation how everything can work out and work the way it is. Okay, so that's the two basic beliefs. Now, this is what it says in the Torah, the first one of the 10 Commandments. I am Hashem, you're Hashem that took you out of Egypt, is a commandment. It's a mitzvah, which means we are commanded to learn about God. Of course, every person, as I said before, you know God. Everybody knows there's God, but it's not enough to just know. You have to learn about it, you have to think about it, to ask questions, answers, be conscious about it. Not just know that there is subconscious. It can be like a thief. When they're stealing, they pray to God, please, the police shouldn't catch me. If you're praying to God, why are you stealing? Right? But apparently his knowledge of God is very abstract. But if he would have a very, conscious awareness of God and not just wake up when he's about to be caught by the police, then he wouldn't go steal, right? Okay. So this is the mitzvah in the Torah. The first mitzvah of the 10 Commandments is to realize that there's a God and know the details and the proofs of his existence. Some people think that connection with God is meant to be just emunah, right? Just belief without any intellectual knowledge. And they think that actually knowledge is against religion, against belief. It's not true. Knowledge is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to ask questions. And of course, if you're just being biased because you want to come with the answer that there's God, and that's the whole reason why you're thinking, that's not called thinking. Thinking means that you're totally thinking as if you could come up with any answer you want, right? Happens to be, you're going to come up with an answer, obviously, that there is a God. Okay, now, this is we just did the first mitzvah in the Torah, knowing that there is a God. Now we come to the second mitzvah, that knowing that God is one. We say every day, 2 times a day, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, that there is only one God. Now, what does that mean, one God? Obviously, we're not saying that I don't think I'm God, you don't think you're God. So what do you mean there's one God? One God means that God is one. There's no parts to it. Now, in different religions, they think that God has different parts, right? And they also, some people think, I don't want to get into the details because it's not our ideology, but that the Satan is also like high up there, right? That he sort of can fight God. We believe that there's only one thing in power. Like Abraham, this is Abraham's innovation. There's one thing in power, God. Nothing else. He has no parts. He's one, right? Now, what makes something two? Makes something two if he's green, if he's blue, if he's size. God is not a size. He's not a time. He's not a place. There's nothing, no physical definition of God, right? So obviously God is one, and there's nothing else in the world that is similar. You can't even give an example for his oneness. It's so one. Now, the Rambam goes into the details in the Torah, how it says in many places that God has hands, he has eyes, he has this, he has that. Now, maybe some people which are simple Jews, which, of course, simple Jews have their specialty, but they can read the Torah and say, oh, it says God has eyes, he has eyes. So it explains the whole Torah is of course saying an example. Of course, God doesn't have eyes, he doesn't have ears. It says God has a sword. Of course, God is not having a sword, he's not killing people with swords, right? It's of course it's an example. It's telling you something which we could relate to, connect with. Now, the Sukkim, the verses that say what the Rambam is saying, it says in the Torah, when you saw God at Mount Sinai, right? 6 millions of Jews, many millions of Jews saw, says in the Torah, you didn't see any form. God has no form. It says nothing is similar to God in the Torah. If God had a form, there would be stuff that are similar to it. This said there's nothing similar to God is because God has no form. He's totally abstract. Now, many people ask the question, what does it mean when Moses asked God, let me see your glory? What does it mean, see? You can't see God. He's not physical. So Rambam explains, see means like when you know your friend. When you get to know somebody, so every time you see him, you know who he is. It's not like you're just a random guy, right? So he wants to like see God. He wants to be like his friend, like recognize him. And then God said, you can't see my face, but you can see my back. Which means you can see me. Rambam says it's an example. When you know someone from his back, right? You see, so you sort of recognize him. You don't know him. A friend, you know from his face. It's just an example. It's not really explaining the concepts. It's just saying it in short. Now, the Rambam goes through many things that you can't say by God, which is obvious. I'm just going to go through them. He says you can't say connection. You can't say separation. You can't say place. You can't say amount. You can't say going up. You can't say going down. You can't say face. You can't say back. You can't say right. You can't say left. You can't say sitting. You can't say standing. You can't say he's in time. You can't say God always was before time, because then you're saying there's time before time. By God, time doesn't exist. There's no was and there's no is. You can't say God always was, because there's no time by God. He can change. Nothing could cause him change because nothing affects him. There's no death. There's no life. There's no. He's not foolish. He's not smart. Like we're smart and foolish, right? He doesn't wake up. Doesn't go to sleep. Doesn't get mad. Doesn't get upset. Which just actually Hasidus disagrees with the Rambam in this concept. We do say God gets mad and gets upset and gets happy, but according to the Rambam's opinion, what he says in the book, God does not get happy. He does not get upset. He doesn't get depressed. He's not quiet. He doesn't speak the way we speak. Okay. Everything in the Torah, if that's the case, is one. Every time it says he's happy, every time he says he's sad, he has hands, he has feet, is all examples. Torah is giving us examples. Now, it's not only examples. Also, every single thing in the Torah comes from God. So our hands, we come from God's hands. Our nose comes from God's nose. Our madness comes from God's madness. Right? So, when we say God has hands, we don't mean he actually has a hand like our hand. But there is a similarity because our hands come from God's hand. Now, if you guys want to know the Chassidic approach, this whole concept, we say that God gets mad, but it's a different type of madness. The example was when you're playing with your child, or you're trying to educate your child, and he gets himself dirty, and he's 1 year old. So if you go, oh, I don't like that, he's not going to get it. That's not how he lives. In his mind, everything, he's either very happy or very sad. That's how children think. They don't have the middle. So if you want them to relate to the fact that you're upset or you don't approve, you have to go, right? Which means, in other words, you have to get into his brain and react the way, right? So now, of course, in other words, when we say God is mad, obviously his way of madness in the truth sense is totally above our comprehension. We can't understand what it means. But when you say in the Torah, God's mad, he's sort of coming down to our level. He's sort of down connecting with us. So the mitzvah of we learned today 2 mitzvahs. First mitzvah is to know that there is a God. Everything in the world is run by God. Every single aspect, everything, and just common sense. Like the story of the rabbi that was trying to speak to the king. He was telling him about God. He's like, I don't believe in God. Apparently, he wasn't comfortable with the existence of God because God makes you limited. You can't do whatever you want. Kids like kings in the olden days, especially, like doing whatever they want. So he didn't agree with the rabbi, and he said, you know what? I'll show you. I have a book that can prove you wrong. So he goes to get his book. And he had on his table a piece of paper and ink. And he came back and there's a beautiful picture on the paper. Like, Rabbi, you're an artist. I'm so impressed. And I was like, me? I didn't make this picture. You don't see the ink, the bowl it's fell on it's like slanted on the side. It fell on the paper and it made this beautiful picture. And the king's like, come on, Rabbi. Stop being humble on me. Right? I know that you made this picture. I'm really impressed. I would love you to make more paintings in my palace. That was like, I have no idea how to paint. This is basically, as they argued, he's like, 1 second. A black ink made a picture on a piece of paper. That can't be my mistake. But this whole world, no, that's a mistake. That happens to be, right? Obviously, common sense. Anything, you go to a factory, there's something running the show. It just doesn't happen. right? Obviously, there's a God running the world. It's common sense, right? And the mitzvah is to think about it, to prove it. There's many proofs. We just went through 2 proofs. There's many proofs how the proof that there is a God. That's step 1. Step 2 is not only we have to know God is one. We can't make a form to God. We can't make a picture to Him. That's why we're going to learn how strict Judaism is with idolatry. You can't even the monuments happens to be according to the Torah. It's good that we're pulling them down. You're not allowed to make monuments according to the, as far as I understand, because making an image of a person is already a problem. We're not meant to idolize anybody besides God.
So it's a good thing with these guys.
Yeah, it's good. but the problem is now I heard they're making monuments of Trump.
No, they're making the other ones up there. BLM.
BLM. So whatever. But the point is that a Jew for sure shouldn't be making a monument because we're very focused on the goal to abstract, because we're humans and we tend to make a form to everything and to take it. The first thing we teach a kid is Hashem is everywhere, is invisible. We're trying to take away all those limitations we put to God, because to understand how great God is, which He is that great, has to be that He has no body, has to be that He has no form, because He's an infinite energy which makes everything else alive. Everyone have a good night and see you tomorrow.